For the longest time, climate change was a topic you'd hear about from scientists or activists, but that's all changed. Today, it's a make or break issue being debated in corporate boardrooms and on Wall Street. So let's dive into this new world of climate reporting, where a company's carbon footprint is suddenly just as important as its bottom line.
So let's just cut right to the chase with a big question. When we talk about climate risk in the business world, are we really talking about the future of the planet or the future of your wallet?
Well, the thing is, it's both. Climate change isn't just some green topic anymore, it's a core financial risk. We're talking about investors who manage trillions of dollars. Yeah, trillions with a T. And global regulators who are now demanding that companies come clean about how all this could hammer their profits. Okay, so to really get this, you've got to understand that climate change can hit a business in two totally different ways. Think of it like two faces of the same coin.
On one side, you have physical risks. This is the stuff that's easy to picture, actual, tangible damage. On the other side, you have transition risks. This one's a bit more subtle. It's all about the financial chaos that happens when the whole world starts shifting away from carbon. So let's unpack both of these. Physical risks are pretty much what they sound like, the stuff you see on the news. They can be acute, like, boom, a hurricane just flattened your factory, or they can be chronic, a slow, creeping problem, like temperatures getting just a little bit hotter every single year, messing with crop yields and quietly driving up your costs. Now, transition risk. This is all about the economic shakeup. Imagine you're running a business, and bam, a new carbon tax just made your flagship product totally unprofitable. Or your competitor rolls out some amazing green tech that makes your entire business model look like a dinosaur. That's transition risk, and it's not hypothetical. Just look at what happened to coal companies as renewables got cheaper. Their value just plummeted.
And I want to be clear, this is not some far-off theoretical stuff. These risks are happening right now, and they are hitting some of the biggest companies on the planet right where it hurts. Let's look at some real-world examples.
We'll start with those acute risks, the sudden, high-impact events that are basically a punch to the gut for a company's finances.
Exhibit A, the utility giant PG&E. After a series of absolutely devastating wildfires in California were linked to their equipment, the company was staring down the barrel of over $30 billion in liabilities. $30 billion! That's enough to force a massive company straight into bankruptcy. A complete financial catastrophe triggered by physical events.
And what's crazy is how these shocks can ripple across the entire globe. Remember the massive floods in Thailand back in 2011? Well, those floods shut down a critical manufacturing hub. Suddenly, Toyota couldn't build over 200,000 cars. The hard drive maker Western Digital lost nearly $200 million in revenue in just one quarter. A local disaster created a global financial nightmare for these companies.
All right, so that's the big, sudden shock. But what about the other kind of physical risk? The chronic problems. This isn't a punch to the gut. It's more of a slow burn crisis that just eats away at a company's value year after year. Let's talk about something many of us love, coffee. Well, the high-quality Arabica beans needed for that great cup are in trouble. Rising temperatures are making it harder to grow them. In fact, projections show that by 2050, we could lose half of the land that's currently suitable for growing Arabica. For a company like Starbucks, this isn't some distant threat. It's a creeping risk that's already making their most important ingredient more and more expensive. So, because of these massive, undeniable risks, the rules of the game are changing, big time. We're moving past the era of vague corporate pledges and into a whole new world of mandatory, super detailed reporting. And a huge concept at the heart of this shift is something called double materiality. It sounds complex, but it's actually pretty simple. It means a company has to report two things. First, how is climate change going to affect our bottom line? And second, how is our business affecting the climate? It's a two-way street. You have to look at the risk coming in and the impact going out. The best example of this new rulebook in action is Europe's ESRS E1 standard. This thing now applies to thousands of large companies doing business in the EU, and its goals are crystal clear. 1, let everyone see your real climate impact. 2, track how you're doing against that 1.5-degree warming target. And 3, figure out if your business plan can actually survive in a low-carbon world. Now, for any of this reporting to actually work, everyone needs to be speaking the same language, right? So regulators have adopted a universal way to count carbon. It all boils down to understanding 3 different categories or scopes of emissions.
Let's break it down real quick. Scope 1 is the obvious stuff. Emissions coming directly from things you own, like your factory smokestacks. Scope 2 is for the power you buy, so the emissions from the power plant that keeps your lights on. And then there's Scope 3. This one's the monster. It's basically everything else in your value chain, from your raw materials all the way to how your customers use your product.
So how are companies doing with this? Well, the data tells a pretty wild story. A good chunk of companies are reporting on their direct Scope 1 and 2 emissions. But then you get to Scope 3 and, wow, the numbers just fall off a cliff. We're looking at a massive data gap. Just 15%. And here's the kicker. For a lot of companies, think car makers or food brands, Scope 3 can be more than 90% of their total carbon footprint. And the reason it's so hard to track is because you have to map these insanely complex global supply chains. It means that right now, the biggest piece of the climate puzzle is still mostly in the dark.
But look, this whole thing isn't just about boring paperwork and ticking boxes for regulators. The really smart companies are looking at this as a catalyst to completely rethink their business strategy, to turn what looks like a risk into a huge opportunity. Check out this story. The Danish energy company Ørsted. Back in 2006, 85% of their business was fossil fuels. But they saw the writing on the wall. They saw those transition risks coming, and they made a huge, gutsy move. They sold off their oil and gas assets and went all in on offshore wind. Today, they're a global leader in renewables. That's how you turn risk into a massive win.
And you can see how this thinking gets baked right into a company's core. This example from Adidas isn't some footnote in a sustainability report. It is their strategy. You see clear science-based targets for cutting emissions across all 3 scopes. Decarbonization isn't some side project. It's right up there with their main financial goals. So the big takeaway here is pretty simple. Climate disclosure is here to stay. What was voluntary yesterday is mandatory today. This isn't a trend, it's a fundamental shift in how business operates, period. And that brings us to the final and honestly the most important question. The conversation is moving past if companies should disclose. We know the risks are real and the reporting rules are here. The question now is this. Are their plans actually good enough? Are they ambitious enough and fast enough to really meet the challenge?